Welcome everybody to the CrySP speaker series on privacy. We continue in our, unfortunately, online setting. We would have, of course, preferred to have our speaker here in person and to have all of you in person, but the world continues to be uncooperative. So we will continue in the online format for the time being. So it is our great pleasure to have Angela Sasse. Angela is from the Ruhr University, Bochum, and she is one of the founders and pioneers in the area of usable security. And we are excited to have her here talking about digital fitness instead of blaming users. So Angela, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, so in my talk today, I want to explain how I'm going to do a way to reboot this concept of security awareness and why I think that is necessary. For those of you who are not aware of it, in practice out there, security awareness is a huge business. I mean, it's like literally billions and billions of dollars being spent by companies to basically buying training materials or buying programs and delivering to their employees. And in my experience, and also in the results of some of my fellow researchers, we've come to the conclusion this doesn't work, and I want to explain to you today why it doesn't work and how we need to go about doing this instead. So talking to some of your colleagues before these talks, I realized I seem to have a reputation for being very very plain spoken and very direct and you know, maybe sometimes confrontational. I really don't have any idea where that comes from, but I'm going to have a go at basically having thought about this problem. We can really pin it to a meme, to a very unfortunate meme that pervades security practice and even to some extent research into usable security. So, and that unfortunate meme is that of the weakest link. You know, so about 20 years ago, Bruce Schneier, according to his publisher, the nearest thing security has to a rock star, i.e., you know, he's super well known and super influential, coined this term. And I think, you know, sort of like being very new to security at the time, sort of in about 2001 or 2002, I wrote him an email and I explained to him why I didn't think using this expression was a good idea, you know, because it basically put the blame on people and saying like it's their fault, you know, they are not doing what we want and it's their and therefore it's their fault. And I was trying to explain to him that it really wasn't their fault at all, that they were basically being faced with what was impossible tasks. But I never got a response, and I mean, in the meantime, I got to know Bruce in person as well, and he's basically very sensible, in many ways, very, very sensible person, and he wouldn't say that today. You know, today you wouldn't find him using this expression, but he's never officially recounted and said, you know, I was wrong, which is sort of like, and I'm still waiting for that, sort of in the same way as the guy who who set the strong password rules at NIST, Billy Burr, a few years ago, basically in an interview in the Wall Street Journal, said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. You know, I was right. I was basically saying people should do something, you know, that humans can't possibly do. And that wasn't working. So I'm still waiting for the official taking back of this. But this meme is really in security practice, in products, it's utterly pervasive, you know, it's everywhere. if you look at, and it's also it's what's being used to sell these security awareness and training programs that companies are buying, by the billions at the moment, and asking their employees, or mandating that their employees work through. So it's really, it can be, I mean, I would use this cartoon so often, but it's this kind of, it's what is the image that we are creating of the human being here, so on the one hand, you basically, security people are saying, we're doing all this effort, we're creating firewalls, encryption, antivirus software, and then what do we have? We have this, like, this weakest link, and if you look at, we have Dave, if you look at Dave, he's well, he's not exactly slim, and if you look at his facial expression, you wouldn't exactly, the word intelligent doesn't come to mind, right? And I think this is really is at the root of this, it's because, it's their fault, they're not doing what we want. And that's really like driven this this attitude, and even to some extent usable security research, or certainly the broader information security management research, is basically beating into this same, it's basically saying the same thing, it's people's fault. And the only reason, they're not doing it is because, I mean, if you look at this quote here, is, they just don't know, they're ignorant, they're negligent, apathetic, and they just, don't want to do what we tell them, and they're resisting it. And so if people make mistakes, it's because they're really, like, thoroughly useless, incompetent and useless people. And that is, I would argue, it's just, if you stop and think about this for a minute, it's just not, it's just wrong, it's not possible. But that line of thinking has really led to this being, the idea of, like, there's something wrong with the human, so let's fix the human. And how do you fix the human? Through security awareness, education, and training. So, and that's where we actually, the situation we've got right now, is that also in many in many of the risk management frameworks, when regulators set standards for information security, there's companies in the sector have to adhere to, there's always this phrase in there, and you must have a security awareness program, or you must have a mandatory security awareness program. And so what we're getting as a result of this is, like, tons and tons of web-based material, which mostly employees have to work through on an annual basis. Often, have to do it again every year, and then they might get tested on it. And then one of the other real, evils this is spawned is particular this anti-phishing training, where companies are claiming that they're training their employees by sending them emails, and that trick them into clicking, and then if they fall for it, are being then directed to more security awareness training on what phishing is, and how allegedly you can tell the difference between a phishing email and a genuine one. Yeah, but it's really it's really just another, we're back at casting, we're still casting users as the enemy. We're still saying, it's these people's fault, it's their link, rather than stopping and examining if the way we're managing security is actually feasible in practice. And really, I've spent over 20 years looking at why people aren't complying with security rules, and yeah, in the most in the most famous paper, which I think is the most cited paper in usable security, what we actually pointed out there is, that people couldn't follow those rules. Human memory isn't built that way, and there is no way you can fix that with training. Well, because yeah, you could, if you want people to handle, a dozen different strong passwords that are changed all the time, you can take your entire workforce, you can send them on a course to become a memory athlete. So we'd send them away for 6 months to do memory athlete training. And when they come back from that, they'll still have to spend half an hour to an hour a day rehearsing those memory skills they've learned, just so they can remember the passwords. So I hope that basically gets across, like, it's absurd, and yet it's taken after, we published this paper in 1999. It took another 15 years until 2015, when the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, in its guidance that it sets for UK companies, basically said that, you can't put all the load of authentication on users. Yeah. So security awareness and training can't fix security that is ineffective, and it's been also one, it's not the main theme of the talk today, but of a lot of the work, the studies we've been doing was basically pointing out that security rules were being enforced, that at the end of the day, they burned time, they burnt attention, they burnt goodwill, but they weren't really improving security. They can't fix the fact that when employees are faced with impossible tasks, when they're faced with either following the security rules or meeting their productivity targets, and they can't fix the fact that you've got distrust in people and sources, they can't really believe what they're being told. So the productivity one is still, this is one that I've seen again and again and again. We're still seeing it when we do studies today, is that the security measures that are, many of our IT security measures are like this this one here, this physical security measure here, which thank you to my colleague Robert Watson, who photographed this in a hotel. So in order to stop the iron from being stolen, they bolted this metal plate onto the ironing board, and the result is that you've reduced the ironing surface by over 40%. So it's going to take you now at least over 40% longer. You're going to spend nearly double the time ironing those trousers on there. And that's how many IT security measures are. The amount of productivity that goes into them is just too much. And if people follow them, they wouldn't be able to get their work done. And I'm still waiting after over 20 years of going into companies, and after all, they call me in because they say they have a problem, people aren't following the rules. Can you come and have a look while they're not doing it? And when you then ask the people who wrote the security rules, who set the policies, who decided to put certain measures into place, whether they had done an estimate or had done a small trial to measure how long it would take to follow the security rules as prescribed. In all my years, I've never found a security specialist who had done that. So they can't tell you, if I say, can you tell me in how much time, let's take your top 5 security rules here, how long it would take people would have to spend in a week or in a month to follow them. And they basically turn around and look at you and go like, well, they don't think it's a relevant question because security is important. so people should just do what they're told. But I think Cormac Hurley put it very nicely in the quote, that security people think there is an unlimited resource of people's time and attention that they can just demand, and of course that's not the reality. So the other, the kind of security measures that people love to hate, and where if you step back and look at it from a systemic point of view, you go like, okay, so service providers have a problem with bot, with attackers setting up bot accounts and things like that. So our solution is to make every human being prove they are a human being. We make every legitimate user has to prove that they're a human being, right? And you're like, well, that is, so you're putting the load of all this onto the legitimate user rather than actually dealing with the attackers, and it leads to this bizarre situation that you've got captures, which then which we all have to do, to our annoyance. Somebody once did an estimate of how many person years are burned every day on people doing captures, and then the attackers employ yet more unfortunate human beings in low wage economies to circumvent those rules, and that's actually, it's not a very a very good, I would argue, it's just an utter disrespect for people's time, and attention, to think, you can just burn it in the name of security. So that was the point I was wanted to make here, is like security awareness and training can't fix a security design that's fundamentally, that's basically fundamentally flawed. In the sense that it creates a task that's impossible to do, or it's one that zaps so much productivity that really, in reality, the individuals aren't following it, but they are doing it because also the company couldn't really afford that time. And so we end up in this individuous situation where the company officially says to the outside world, we have this policy, but inside it also says to employees, you all know this policy, right? But then also nudge, nudge, wink, wink, yes, of course, we must meet our production targets. And so, like, if you, we turn a blind eye to the fact that you're not really following the rules. But if something goes wrong, then they think they could go like, yes, but we've trained all of our employees, and so we could, we can then blame this employee for not having followed the policy. I think in most Western countries, good luck with that if you're trying to go to an employment tribunal or a court with that, because they will always look for what is, how do most employees behave, and what happened, were people previously pulled up for or sanctioned for not following the rules. And when they then find that no, the reality is, in most companies, most people break most of the security policies most of the time, and nothing happens. Only if there is an incident, if there's a security breach, then it's basically acted against. So, but I'm not saying, what this talk's not about is, I'm not saying people don't have to learn about security. They do. And they do need to do that very urgently, because really digitalization has advanced at quite a significant speed. And so people's threat models and their models for what you can trust in the digital world have been left behind, and they really do have to learn have to learn new threat models, and they have to also learn certain behaviors. What I'm saying is that the way that the training is done at the moment doesn't really help. So if we want, what security awareness and training should do is establish or update the threat models for the digital age, communicate what measures, what behaviors you can take to protect yourself effectively against that, and then through training also you can learn how to apply them correctly, and in part also we should be able to get people to understand who are trustworthy sources of information, but that's of course something that also relies on having an ecosystem where people are able to check that. I'll come back to that later on. So in theory, security awareness measures could do those things. In practice, however, at the moment, I don't know if you've ever, if one of you have ever sat through one of those mandatory training programs. It's really, you're trying to get people to understand something and to develop and then follow secure behaviors. The training consists only of information that's basically delivered online, and mostly in online training, maybe also handed out on paper in onboarding meetings or something. And it's like completely, it's just information. Here is it, and it's done in a fire and forget mode. So. It doesn't even in the majority of situations, doesn't even get to, do you have any questions about this? The quality of the material itself is often of a really poor standard, So you find there's lots of contradictions, ambiguities. The information is really complex, and a lot of it, frankly, is irrelevant. And then they mandate or recommend behaviors that then when employees, when they go into their department, do their work in practice, find is impossible. It's completely untargeted. So generally everybody in most companies, everybody gets the same training, rather than actually, and that is actually, it's just, if you imagine this, it's untargeted. Whether you work in production somewhere or whether you work in finance, the risks that you're dealing with are quite different. It's also completely untargeted as to, well, it's not like, who says people come in with a completely empty brain. So you're making people who already know something about it, say from their previous job, or because they've learned it at school, or because they happen to be interested. They're put through mandatory training where, where they're being told stuff they already know, and that's not particularly intriguing or motivating. It's also like completely disconnected. The material is just, it goes on, security is important, but it doesn't really connect it to the values and norms that the company has, or it's not adapted to particular practices or production processes or things that employees do in daily life. And so it's really, it's a bit like, somebody's asking you to learn like it's equivalent of learning bits from a book, that has no no particular connection. You could give people like the Bible or any, it has no connection to what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And the result of this is really it destroys the goodwill and trust, and that basically the most common reaction that you get when you just say IT security to a person in a normal company out there, you just pull a face, which is like, and I think that's not good, right? Because we know that having effective security and having effective and following certain practices is important in order to protect our digital estate and to protect companies using these digital things. But the current way of doing it really is so, you know, it's really, it's as if you know, sort of like the ability to target, to set profile groups and to target, to make the effort of actually targeting relevant things never happened. Okay, so this really, it's the first bit. It's like, you know, it's just the quality of the material and the way it's deployed is just really bad. The second part of this is, well, how do people learn? What do we know about how people learn? And is that reflected in the kind of security awareness and training that's being deployed today? And again, the answer is like, no, you know, so I think this is like how security people think learning works, you know, that you can force this down people's throat. And the other part is, of course, is that what you ultimately want is you want people to carry out secure behaviors. You know, you want them to stop engaging in unsecure practices and move to secure ones. And this misconception is that lots of motivation, you know, or forcing them, as in the previous diagram, plus then some of them have heard of this concept called a teachable moment, that leads to behavior change. So I myself, I'm a great fan of BJ Fogg and the BMAT behavior model. And it has indeed, it talks about trigger moments. And so one of the ways in which we have used that is that we lurked in the computer and entertainment department of a big shop and asked people who just spent, you know, usually a few thousand on a computer or tablet, whether we could talk to them about IT security and how they were going to keep it secure, you know, because arguably, you know, that's an example of a trigger moment. You've just gone and spent a significant amount of money on a new computer. And so your interest in keeping that, keeping the computer secure, particularly when you speak to people about it, a lot of them said like, yeah, you know, the old one, it was just getting slow. And it wasn't just because the processor, you know, sort of the processor was getting old, but because also, you know, people will then say, because yeah, there was a lot of crap on it, you know, and I hadn't, you know, I probably acquired a few, you know, just too much stuff on it. So when you then go and say to them, would you like to learn a bit about how you can keep this new device secure? Most of them say yes, you know, tell me more. And then when you give them some guidance that they find they can follow, that's a good example. A bad example of a trigger moment is thinking that because an employee has just fallen for a phishing message you've sent them, that would be a good time to teach them about, you know, about phishing security, or it may be a good time to teach them about it. But the key problem is this one here is, so what BJ Fox said very clearly is, yes, trigger moments are, you know, potentially a good thing, but they only work above the curve. So when people are motivated, and they are able to do it, they find that what they're being told to do, they can actually follow. Whereas if it's hard to do, if they find it's actually too difficult to do, or they don't think it's particularly important, then you can trigger, you know, you can do your trigger moments, but nothing's gonna happen. You know, they're not going to change their behavior. But rather they might basically just go, oh yes, again, you know, I tried to do security and find it's impossible, so I'm going to ignore it from here on in. And this, you know, and here we're coming to, like, as long as a lot of the behaviors we are telling people to do, they find in practice are impossible to follow, or only to follow, and they demand far too much of their time and attention, you're not going to get behavior change. And similarly, you will, if you look at the application of the concept of nudges it's been quite fashionable in security research, in usable security research recently. It's again, you can nudge people to do something, but if the security behavior is too much effort, or it's too complex to work out what I have to do, then people are still not going to do it. And Richard Thaler, to some extent, there's two things I really like about him. So he said, he basically gets increasingly exasperated and said, if you want people to do something, make it easy. You can't use a nudge to get people to do something that's too difficult, or that they don't want to do, and when he signs his books now, he always signs it like nudge for good, Richard Thaler. And that point is like, you can't use a nudge to make people do something they don't want to do. A nudge has a particular function, that is, if somebody has agreed to do something that they want, they've agreed on the goal and they say they want to change their behavior, the nudge is there to remind them. And we will see at which stage of the behavior change it can be sensibly employed. But as a thing in itself, just to turn behavior around, you can't use a nudge. So I've been particularly been very, getting increasingly furious at, this so-called anti-phishing training. Because I think it's another example of an impossible security task. Telling the difference between a well-crafted phishing mail and a genuine mail is just not possible a lot of the time. Yes, of course, there are some phishing messages that are, with bad spelling, but that's not the state of the art in terms of the attacks that are coming in. They're incredibly well crafted. They're very plausible because the attackers know quite, often they've got a lot of information about the company, even people, because they go and, they pull all this information from LinkedIn and so on, and they pretend to be a friend of one of your friends, or they know that you have a relationship with this company, and often they've broken into people's email accounts, so they know what's going, know what's going on, and so this is extremely well targeted. And when you're working through several hundred emails in a day, this idea of that you could spend a lot of time of pondering, is just ridiculous. I mean, just before we go into some of the other examples, I want to basically point out, I hope we can all agree on that if a company is brought down because one employee clicked on a wrong link, from a technical point of view, their security wasn't very good to start with, right? And this is really what I'm concerned about. I'm not saying that not under certain, not talking to people about phishing and not warning, warning against phishing. But what we're seeing is the only money that's being spent is basically spent on this anti-phishing training, rather and very often not on the, not on your perimeter defenses, keeping this, keeping these kind of emails out, not using schemes like DMARC or DKIM that would allow for easy recognition of legitimate mails, and so on. So what we're seeing is basically this escalation, that the kind of phishing content that's being used is getting nastier and nastier, and it's really causing, causing upset. And basically they are now at a level where I'd say they're really the training providers who do this, they're actually entrapping people into clicking, that they're really, their messages that seem so important or so surprising, and so now imagine if this happened to you, you get an email from your employer promising you a bonus, and then not only do you find out that you're not getting a bonus, you're then also being told off for having clicked on a phishing email, and then now you have to spend 5 or 10 more minutes on mandatory online training. And so some companies have actually rethought this, because when several dozen of your employees start venting on public, on Twitter and other public forums about this, it's actually not good publicity. And also some of the companies who find their names being taken in vain in these phishing campaigns, such as Facebook, are also fighting back and are saying, run this anti-phishing training if you must, but don't use fake Facebook messages. And they do that. They basically saying, they're arguing this on the grounds of copyright infringement. But of course, Facebook knows that it's a very unpleasant experience to have fallen for one of these things, and you have negative consequences. It's all negative emotions, and now these negative emotions get connected to a Facebook mail, and that's bad for the Facebook brand, and that's why they're trying to stop companies using fake Facebook messages. I think this has happened. It just happened last week in Germany to Amazon. Where this hospital provider was basically sending out, in the name of anti-phishing training, messages saying, you've all worked so hard on the Corona stuff. We're giving you an extra, a bonus in the form of an Amazon voucher. And then, that was, and again, employees, are furious, to being tricked, and I would argue it's like, this stuff it's just insane, because we are, I'm saying, like, you don't want your employees, you don't want users to be, treat them as the enemy and turn them against you, and turn them against security. And that is what this stuff is doing in spades, and really the usable security research that's really gone into companies or worked with communities to understand how they perceive security, and what they're really looking for, is we're coming again and again to the conclusion that trust and collaboration between all the good guys within a particular ecosystem, that is what you need in order to deliver effective security. And these kind of training measures, so-called training measures, are doing exactly the opposite. They're putting people off, they're turning them against each other, they're destroying trust. And from an economic point of view, this is also, it's particularly bad, because I quite like this. I mean, sort of like, sometimes I do like these airport type pop sci type books, and this one really I found very, very good, where they looked at, what does actually make some of those very successful companies today successful, and the answer is they have a very high degree of cohesion between teams. There's a lot of connectedness, and there is a high degree of trust between individual members, but the essential preconditions are that the individuals feel safe, that they feel connected with team members, and that they believe, there is a joint future, that they're working towards a joint future together, and that the way security awareness is practiced today, it does exactly the opposite. It sets people against each other. It destroys trust, and it makes people feel unsafe. If you're sitting there and with your email every day, with every message, you have to you have to be on your toes, whether you're being attacked again by your own company in the name of security training. It's really not making you feel safe. It's quite the opposite, And so my what I want to put to you today is this kind of stuff. It has to stop. It's become toxic, and I said it needs rebranding, and I think we should stop talking about security awareness, and that we should talk about, so the best concept, as far, you know, somebody else might come with a better term for it. I think digital fitness, when I now go into companies or help companies build a kind of what you would have previously called a security awareness program, I think we should call it digital fitness instead. So to just in the last few minutes to finish off, I want to just very quickly go back to this, you know, but just getting information across is not enough. You know, you're trying to change behaviors, and here is, you know, where there's really a big, you know, change needed in companies when they're delivering this. We wrote a white paper in '95 together with the National Cybersecurity Center and HP Enterprise, as it was at the time, you know, where we said, like, getting the information there and persuading people that particular security behaviors are important is an initial step, but you still need to, you know, these are highly learned behaviors. They are what Kahneman calls system 1 behaviors. What we call habits or routines. You know, there are behaviors that are carried out without really thinking about it, without making a conscious choice. And changing one of those highly learned routines is quite an undertaking. It's not, you're not going to do that by saying, stop doing this and now do that instead. It takes a while to dismantle the old highly learned behavior. And there are a series of steps needed to do that. So over the past few years, I've reworked this curve, and we've actually put a few more steps. We've actually found, you know, some concrete steps that you need to put in, and let me just basically go through and highlight the things that you need to do. So yes, you raise awareness that there is a need for, that there is a threat, and that there is a need for adhering to certain behaviors in order to manage that threat. So you render people amenable to change through awareness, you know, but that is only the very first step, you know. So now you've got their attention. What is the next thing is then you've got their attention. Now you need to get them to agree that it's a good idea to change the behavior. So rather than mandating a behavior, which is the traditional compliance model, is you need them to actually really take the goal on for themselves and to agree that the new that the way of getting there, that what you're trying to achieve is actually that they can do this, that they agree to that. So this concept called concordance, and it's been shown in the medical sector that it makes a very big difference whether that instead of the medical specialist saying, you know, here's your treatment plan, do this, to agree the goal together, what is it you want to achieve, then basically look at the treatment plan, and for the patient to say, yes, I can do this, or you know, that one would be difficult, can we do this differently, and so on. So finding a way of establishing concordance with your employees is important. Then the next part is most people are very reluctant to try something new if they're not confident that they're going to succeed. And this is this concept called self-efficacy, and that's actually been in a number of studies been measured when researchers have looked at security behavior in organizations. And it was in a big review we did for ENISA a few years ago. We found it was really the only concept that made that was strongly connected to actually a security behavior being changed. So people need to be confident that they can do the new thing. And that basically shows why this online type of training we've got at the moment doesn't really work so well. It's because you're just being told something, but you don't get the experience of trying it out and building up the confidence that you're able to do it. So a good experience is like, you know, we find, you know, in many companies, tailgating is still an issue. And the companies, you know, they basically go like, why won't our employees turn around and tell somebody who's trying to tailgate behind them, you know, that they can't do this? And the answer is because they've never learned that you can challenge somebody and not be at risk of confrontation, you know. And you need to do, this is not something you can do online. It requires, say, for instance, in a lunchtime setting, small group role playing. And once you've learned in role playing a few times, most people get the hang of it, and then they can do it when somebody tries to tailgate behind them for real. No, and this is basically, it's we pointed that out in the ENISA report. It's very, very important with security behaviors that you give people a chance to rehearse them and to build up their confidence in doing it, because at the moment you've put them into this position where they're constantly being told that they're weak, and you're demonstrating to them through anti-phishing training that they're failing. You know, that's not really the way to set them on the path towards secure behaviors. And then the final stage where the nudging comes in is the failure to remove, you know, call it taking out the trash, to remove old behaviors and things that have become superfluous, you know. And it's one of the reasons why the awareness materials in such a terrible state, is because they're just piling on new things and they're never explicitly taking things out, you know. So intentional forgetting is remove the cue to the old behavior. Just a quick example is, you know, so we found, for instance, if you want people to stop using passwords and managing them in a, you know, in an ad hoc way, so and using a password manager, is by not calling it a password, you get a faster transition to them using the password manager, because as soon as you say password, you're triggering the existing routines that they have for, like, oh, I have to think up a password, and then there's an algorithm with their personal salt thrown in or whatever, and you know, that seems to be, and then I write it down, you know, that's how I normally do it. By not calling it a password, but switching to something like credentials, you know, or authentication, something, and saying we're doing something new now. That is a way of going forward. So shift to digital fitness. Ordinary users do need to acquire new knowledge when it comes to IT security. And really, but also what we find is, like, threat models, you know, threat models are out of date. You know, for 20 years, I hear people telling me I'm not rich or famous. So, you know, I don't think I'm really a target, you know, and it's that kind of thing we need to replace with up-to-date threat models. You know, we need to explain that if something looks very similar to a web page you've seen before, that doesn't mean it's the same. You know, those kind of things are what we need to get across. You know, and also, but we can't have people, like, you know, stop and think and ponder 5 minutes over every email. So we need to basically really look for, you know, basically look to an interesting enough, tell them to trust their gut when they feel that something isn't quite right or is out of the ordinary, to then have the self-confidence to say, like, okay, I need to look into this in more detail, or I need to go and ask someone, I need to talk to my colleagues about it, or I need to call the security department. So security awareness is not just for end users. I think security professionals need it more, and there's a lot of skills they need in order to do something like this more effectively. So company leaders also have a lot more to learn. You know, they have to really put resources into establishing secure behaviors. That's not really something that's happening effectively today. You know, they basically they're not really also understanding is that this is not something people can do in their spare time. You need to budget time for learning secure behaviors, which are very important to the company. And, you know, by not really providing explicit resources for it, what you're doing is signaling to people, again, that it can't be, you know, it can't really be that important. You know, if the company leadership doesn't think it's important enough to spend money on it. You know, why should employees think it is important? That's really just ridiculous. Okay, so sorry, it's been a bit of a gallop through this, but I hope it's given you some impression of that really security awareness is bust and it needs a reboot. And this is what we're working on at the moment in our research. I think to some extent, you know, there's an argument for take it away from the security experts and give it to people who know something about learning and behavior change. You know, of course, you can consult, you know, we can listen to the security experts about the what is the safe behavior, but then how we're getting that across to people and how we get the behavior changed is maybe not something we should rely on security experts to come up with. You know, it's I think it's not something you know, we don't want to create fear, you know, we don't want to create unpleasant experiences around it. That's not the way to do it, you know. And there's really a lot, you know, to the rebranding to just basically put a positive spin on it, you know, to really talk about, you know, the benefits of digitalization. You know, but that means there's a lot of value in the digital estate now. And so, of course, the bad guys are coming and trying to, you know, take it away from it. And there's just some rules we need to follow to keep them in place, you know. And I think very much it's like, you know, get away from this obsession is that we get secure behavior by parking the tank on the lawn in front of the individual and going like learn. It's a collective activity that happens in organization, and there's many of the stakeholders who have to do their bit here and play a role. You know, don't dump it all on the one individual and say, you know, you're defective, I'm going to fix you through security awareness. I hope you agree with me that that's not a good idea and it has to stop.
Okay, let's thank Angela. Of course, she's the, I'm the only one who's clapping she can hear. Okay, so there's a few minutes to ask some questions. Some people are already putting questions in the Q&A, which is great. I'm actually just going to start with one myself, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I want, just being extra cynical here, I just wonder how much of this ineffective security training being done by companies is a product of the companies doing these so-called best practices, which is a terrible term that really means the worst practices that they're legally allowed to get away with, right? So if they're trying to just escape legal liability, but they're not actually trying to improve security, then I would expect to see exactly what we do see, where you just put up a little video or what would have been like a flash interaction or something that does some training without even, as you say, asking, do you have any questions? I could see companies doing that just to say, oh no, we had training, you can't sue us. We do the same thing all the other companies do, which are these best practices. So I wonder how much of this bad training is, in some sense, they're not even trying to do a good job. They're only trying to escape legal liability.
There is, yeah, but from my interactions with them, there's certainly some individuals on some boards who think that way, you know, and who just basically want to do the minimum, get away with it. But there's been quite, I think that number of it has gone down quite a lot over the years. I mean, if you'd asked me this 5 years ago, I would have said the majority, you know, yeah, you know, I would have agreed with you and it's majority. But it's definitely the awareness just what amongst the business leaders, the awareness of what the consequences are has really been increasing. And so if you look at, for instance, the just how bad it can really hit and disable your company, that's been increasing. I think also, as I said, a few of the companies who tried this in most Western countries, you can't basically blame the individual. This is basically because the courts or the legal tribunals are taking a parallel to workplace safety regulation. And they're saying is if you knew that people weren't following the rules and you didn't do anything about it, you are liable. Right. So just saying is we did the training and then, if people aren't doing it, that's fine. That is in most regulated sectors, you wouldn't get away with that.
Great. I'll give another question from the chat. So the question is, actually, can you see the chat now yourself?
Yes, I can see. So Paul's question here, how do you educate? This is an excellent question, and it's one we are really very much trying to answer. That is the $64,000 question.
So repeat the question.
It's how do you educate users about the modern threat landscape without terrifying them, especially given that the landscape is terrifying. I absolutely agree with you. This is a challenge. This is a great research challenge. So one of the approaches we're trying to take at the moment, of course, the end bit is that there is something you can do about it. Right, basically, you can't just tell them about the threat and then leave them hanging. You need to give them and here is what you can do about it. Part, they need to go together, and then of course it's partly using this really not, basically people deal with risks in their life, in many situations and all the time. It's like the terrifying bit is if you feel helpless. And if you either don't feel able to detect the risk or you don't feel able to do anything about managing it to the extent that you're then comfortable with, right? And so that is why also this really going through, and getting the behavior change is established is part of it. The other part is that we find it is a lot less terrifying if you do it in groups. And so social learning experience, to be able, first of all, to share your fear with others, with peers. So if we're doing basically groups of students, or we're doing groups of older people and things like that, that is also the fear comes up, is definitely reduced by sharing it, by finding others also have this problem. And the other part is, but what can I do about it? And also, of course, is if there is if there is a person or a place where you can go in doubt to get authoritative advice, that is very important, and that varies hugely at the moment. Within a company, you should be able to manage that by having a helpline. You're having somewhere that you can call. When you're talking about citizens out there and so on, that varies between countries, whether there really is is the police, or there is a national technical authority, or there are consumer protection people that you can call to help you with it. I hope that's answered Paul's question. This is very much still a live research issue, but my answer is don't leave them hanging. You've then Meaty asked the question, you've talked at the start about how security trainings often do not begin what the person has learned from their previous experiences. You talked about efficacy and rehearsing new behaviors. I'm wondering whether higher research education theory was relevant. For example, pre-assessing students what they know. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I totally agree with you, Miti, and I was say is what we're doing, in higher education. I think if you know what you're doing, you know that you're taking people from A to B, and you know where B is, but you need to, with each of the students at first, assess where is A you know, and then basically do that. And also your point here is setting up a learning environment where students can safely fail. Yes, absolutely. And that is what in security learning, absolutely. That's what we need to do, you know, and that's why, you know, I'm not saying you should never interact with phishing messages or try to recognize them or something. It's just the way that it's done at the moment where you can't safely fail. That is the wrong things. I hope that's, yeah, so definitely. Then another question from Paul. I don't know if a question here, but I've observed the narrative is changing. Instead of educating users, we will just track everything they do and intervene when we see them making security mistakes. Have you seen this? I think I know the kind of products you're referring to. I think not. No, I don't think we can not do training. You know, we can do training much better. And also one of my key points is like, you know, we have to, but the approach you're describing here is still the one where you think it's just all about individual learning. Whereas, of course, out in organizations, it's about team learning and the whole organization learning. And that means people, it's very, very important that people talk to each other about security as part of their daily work and daily life, you know. And so I think just tracking individuals and then intervening when they make mistakes, that can't work. You know, there needs to be communication about it. There needs to be common ground. You know, and you need to establish a vocabulary, and you need to establish those routines. So just monitoring and intervening when they make mistakes isn't going to work.
Okay, we're out of time. Let's thank Angela again. Yay, clap, clap. Thank you for your talk and your visit. And as usual, we will now move to the meeting with some students, and you'll be able to ask more questions from Angela there. Okay, thank you, everybody.